The United States dollar has floated free of any tangible anchor since 1971. Yet for more than 5 decades, virtually every barrel of crude sold globally has been priced in that currency. This is not the result of pure market preference or superior efficiency. It stems from a quiet agreement struck in a Jeddah palace in 1974. It is also the least examined. Once its true mechanics become clear, questions shift from why oil costs what it does to why some nations face invasion while others do not. That realization lingers. To appreciate the 1974 breakthrough, one must first revisit the alarm of 1971. On the night of August 15th, President Richard Nixon appeared on television and declared that the United States would temporarily suspend the conversion of dollars into gold at the fixed rate of $35 an ounce. He framed the move as protection against foreign speculators. What he could not admit publicly was that American gold reserves had plummeted from more than 20,000 metric tons after World War II to roughly 8,100 tons, led by Francis Charles de Gaulle. Foreign governments had been redeeming dollars for bullion, emptying Fort Knox at an alarming pace. Nixon had no alternative. Had the gold window remained open, central banks would have drained the vaults within months. The dollar's value had rested on gold under the 1944 Bretton Woods framework. Every major currency was pegged to the dollar, and the dollar itself was pegged to gold. When that link snapped, the dollar became fiat paper backed only by promise. Promises in global finance decay quickly. Between 1971 and 1973, the dollar fell more than 30% against the German mark. U.S. inflation surged from 3.3% to 8.7%. By March 1973, the entire Bretton Woods system had collapsed as nations abandoned fixed exchange rates. The dollar was in free fall, threatening the post-war order, the Marshall Plan's legacy, the trade network, and the military alliances sustained by low-cost borrowing were all at risk. Washington urgently needed a new foundation, something the industrialized world required so intensely that countries would hold dollars, not out of trust, but necessity. They chose oil. The real bargain never appeared in textbooks. In June 1974, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger traveled to Jeddah to meet Prince Fahd bin Abdulaziz Al Saud. Publicly, the meeting produced the U.S.-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation Planned Initiatives in Technology, Infrastructure, Education, and Statistics. The Genuine Compact, negotiated alongside Treasury Secretary William Simon and facilitated by banker David Mulford, was far more strategic. Saudi Arabia agreed to price all its oil exports exclusively in U.S. dollars. The massive surpluses generated after the 1973 OPEC embargo and prices quadrupled would be recycled into U.S. Treasury securities. The design was precise. Saudi Arabia's central bank, CMR, received special access to purchase treasuries outside normal auctions, bypassing competitive bidding and public scrutiny. King Faisal insisted the transactions remain confidential. The U.S. Treasury obliged. For more than 40 years, Saudi holdings were not listed separately. They were hidden inside a vague oil exporters category. Only in 2016 did official data reveal roughly $117 billion in Saudi-owned U.S. Tantamount analysts believe was understated due to offshore routing. In return, the United States pledged military protection, arms, training, and security against regional dangers, primarily the Soviet Union and secular Arab nationalist movements threatening the monarchy. This was the birth of the petrodollar, not a currency but a system that transformed oil into permanent demand for American government debt, financed U.S. military reach, and rendered the dollar indispensable without a single ounce of gold. Most observers stop at the Saudi Pact and believe they understand the petrodollar. They do not. The Saudi agreement was merely the foundation. Other OPEC producers, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, Iraq soon followed. By the late 1970s, nearly all OPEC oil was dollar-denominated. From 1974 to 1981, the group's combined current account surplus reached $450 billion, with 90% concentrated in Gulf states. Those funds flowed steadily into the U.S. financial system. Consider the mechanical loop. Japan possesses no domestic oil, yet must power its factories, heat its cities, and fuel its vehicles. To buy crude, Japan first earns dollars largely by exporting cars and electronics to the United States. It then uses those dollars to purchase Saudi oil. Saudi Arabia takes the dollars and invests them in U.S. treasuries. Washington employs the proceeds to fund government spending, including military bases that safeguard the sea lanes carrying Japan's tankers. The circle closes. Germany, South Korea, India, and Brazil operate inside the same loop. Every industrial economy routes through it, and every route passes through Washington. The United States issues the currency the system demands, borrows at rates no other nation could sustain, and uses the borrowed funds to maintain the military that protects the arrangement. Scale underscores the leverage. Global oil consumption averages about 100 million barrels daily, at a moderate $80 per barrel. That equals roughly $8 billion in daily transactions that must settle in dollars. $3 trillion. Annually, this baseline demand exists regardless of U.S. productivity, inflation, or policy errors. It supplies the floor that lets Washington finance deficits at otherwise impossible interest rates. Political economist David Spiro described the recycling as a politically engineered hidden hand of hegemony. Washington deliberately blocked multilateral IMF proposals, preferring a captive system over a cooperative one. The result was an imperial financing machine of unmatched elegance. America exported paper and imported real goods. It sustained chronic trade deficits without triggering currency crises. It financed wars, welfare, and tax cuts, simultaneously on money the world was compelled to lend. Yet, privilege enforced by compulsion carries an expiration date. The compulsion has historically been upheld by force. In November 2000, Saddam Hussein secured UN approval to price Iraq's oil for food program in euros rather than dollars. The euro stood at about 82 cents. The switch was financially costly and administratively burdensome, yet Hussein pursued it for political reasons. A major OPEC producer pricing oil outside the dollar could inspire others. Iran and Venezuela were already exploring the idea. By 2002, Iraq had converted $10 billion of reserves into euros. 16 months later, on March 19, 2003, the United States invaded. The official reasons weapons of mass destruction, Al-Qaeda ties proved, unfounded. One of the first acts of the U.S.-installed authority was to restore dollar pricing for Iraqi oil. A parallel case emerged in 2009 when Muammar Gaddafi, as African Union president, proposed a gold-backed Pan-African currency, the gold dinar. Oil-producing African and Arab nations would sell crude for this new unit, backed by Libya's 143 tons of gold and continental resources. The goal was to redirect revenues from Western banks into African institutions. Several nations expressed interest. In March 2011, NATO intervened in Libya under a humanitarian banner. Declassified emails later revealed that Gaddafi's gold reserves and dinar plan were cited as threats to French financial interests. After Gaddafi's death in October 2011, the Transitional National Council promptly created a new central bank and returned oil sales to dollars. Libya, once boasting Africa's highest human development index with free education, healthcare, and the massive Great Man-Made River project, descended into fragmentation. These episodes do not constitute proof in isolation, yet the pattern is unmistakable. Nations lacking military deterrence that challenged petrodollar dominance faced severe consequences. Meanwhile, nuclear-armed powers such as Russia and China have advanced to dollarization more cautiously. Today, the challengers are no longer small or vulnerable. In 2023, China and Saudi Arabia executed their first yuan-denominated oil transaction. Shanghai's energy exchange now manages yuan-priced crude futures, representing about 10% of global volume. On June 9, 2024, the 50-year U-Saudi framework agreement expired without renewal. Saudi Arabia's top customer is now China, which buys over 20% of its exports. American imports have declined sharply since the shale boom turned the United States into a net exporter. Riyadh has joined BRICS as an invitee and signed currency swaps and investment pacts with Beijing. Reports suggest Saudi Arabia may be converting yuan oil proceeds into physical gold via the Shanghai Gold Exchange and oil for gold channel, bypassing dollars entirely. Central banks worldwide bought more than 1,000 tons of gold in both 2022 and 2023. The fastest pace since before the gold window closed. Russia, China, India, Turkey, and Poland lead the surge. These same countries are constructing parallel payment systems, independent of SWIFT. The dollar's share of global reserves has fallen from 73% in 2001 to roughly 58% by early 2025. Echoing the pound sterling's long decline decades earlier, the petrodollar is not collapsing overnight. It is eroding through the steady accumulation of alternatives by Actusta. Too powerful. Ultimately, the system was never truly about oil. Oil served as the vehicle. The destination was always debt. Every country needing oil must hold dollars. Every dollar held abroad becomes a loan to the U.S. government. Every treasury bond purchased by a foreign central bank finances American consumption, military outlays, and deficits at rates that would bankrupt others. The depth of U.S. markets and the dollar's liquidity exists partly because petrodollar recycling flooded them with capital for 50 years. The exorbitant privilege is sustained by compulsion, and compulsion is now weakening. The transition will unfold over years, perhaps decades, yet the direction is irreversible. When Britain lost reserve currency status, the shift was gradual. The pound's purchasing power collapsed more than 90% between 1940 and 1980, while nominal values appeared stable. Savers who trusted sterling assets saw real wealth evaporate. The same risk now confronts those holding savings, retirements, and futures in dollar-denominated instruments. The map of economic reality is being redrawn by nations unwilling to subsidize its distortions any longer. The petrodollar endured for 50 years because oil was the only commodity universal and essential, enough to compel global acceptance of a fiat currency detached from gold. That forcing function is fading not because oil has lost importance, but because producers are no longer bound by the old terms. The architecture replacing it is already under construction. The critical question is whether you will recognize the new design before you are living inside it.